Hey everyone, it's Theo from Spectrum Gardening. So today I'm going to be cooking up some garlic scapes. I'll be showing you three different recipes how you can be using them. Just keep in mind though that the possibilities are basically endless. You can put them in curry, you can put them in stir fries, you can put them in soups, you can put them in stews, you can put them in casseroles, you can even put them in chili, or you can barbecue them with a little bit of butter. So those three recipes I'll be showing you will just be kind of an example of just what you can do with them. I'll also be showing you a couple different ways that you can preserve them also. Our daughter Em is celiac, and she's also dairy intolerant. So all these recipes are either gluten-free and or dairy-free unless otherwise noted. For all the recipes I'll be showing you and all the storage methods, what you'll be wanting to do is remove the very tip of the scape where it kind of tapers down to a stringy part. The reason for that is when this part is cooked up, it burns and it tastes very woody. So what you'll want to do is go to where the bulb would initially form, is right here. Go probably a couple inches away, right about here. And if you're cooking it inside and you're roughly cutting up, you can just use a knife or and easily cut this up. Or if you're cooking a whole on a barbecue or something like that, you can just take a whole bunch and take a pair of scissors and just cut it like this across all of them. For years, when my in-laws in Russia grew garlic, they don't grow it anymore, but when they did, they wouldn't actually eat the scapes. They would harvest them, but what they'd be doing is throwing them to the chickens and letting the chickens kind of peck away at them. And when I told them what they could actually cook with the garlic scapes, their minds were blown. It opened up a whole new world to them. Mind you, they're not growing anymore, so it's kind of a moot point. These are also the same relatives who have a great big established asparagus patch outside their kitchen window, but yet they never harvest it. Well, they grow it for the ferns. They like the look of asparagus when it's flowering. And to be honest, we're doing the exact same thing. We have a smaller patch in our yard, and we're going to be adding to it probably, and we're going to be letting it get a little bit more established. And the reason for that is because, well, I want my wife to have elements of what she grew up with in Russia here in Canada. I want her to have elements of her childhood and things that remind her of her home country. So I absolutely love to cook. It's a true passion of mine, just like what gardening and growing is. However, unfortunately, I don't cook as much as I would like or as I should be. It mostly falls onto my wife's shoulders, to say it matter of fact. I've got a few different challenges, including executive dysfunction. That's not an excuse, but just to say plainly, I just don't cook as much as I want to or as I should. However, when I do cook, I usually typically cook blind. And what I mean by blind, I'm not having my eyes closed or having a blindfold over me. What I mean by that is I'll take out all the ingredients, and I mean all of them, like any spice or any ingredient that I think I may use, I'll take it and I'll put it on the counter so I can visually see it. And then what I'll start doing is I'll start adding those randomly to the recipe, and I won't be measuring anything. I'll just kind of eyeball it out, and I won't actually taste the dish until it's nearing the end. And that's when I start tasting, and that's when I start tweaking if need be. This video is not sponsored by any companies or brands I might mention or use throughout this video. However, I will be posting some affiliate links down in the description below. And if you choose to purchase an item through that affiliate link, we will make a small commission. However, the item doesn't cost any more, and it's another great way that you can support us. The first recipe I'll be making is by far the easiest and simplest. We're just going to be sauteing the scapes. Here I have the garlic scapes that I've roughly chopped up beforehand. I've got my melt butter, which is a vegan butter made out of coconut oil and a few other things too, but it's vegan. I've got my kosher salt over here. We like kosher salt because it's a little bit bigger than table salt. And I have my ground pepper over here. And that's all that we're gonna need for this recipe. Now that I've got my pan preheated, I've added some melt butter to it. You could use regular butter if you wanted, or you could use some sort of different types of oil, but this is a vegan recipe because our daughter is dairy intolerant, so I'm just using melt butter. So I'm gonna add the scapes, and I wanna make sure the pan is big enough to accommodate all the scapes so I can have them nicely spaced out. So they cook nice and evenly. Throughout the time that they're frying, you kind of want to make sure you're going to be stirring them so they're not going to just burn on one side. So now that they're starting to kind of crisp up and I can see that they're cooking, it's time to add a little bit of salt and pepper to them. So you can see I didn't really measure, I just kind of eyeballed it out. Just add however much according to your own tastes. And if you look at them, they're getting pretty much, I can tell they're almost pretty much done. And let's take a small piece, let's check it out. Yep, I would say they're pretty much done. I'm just going to leave them on for a touch longer because I can see the bigger pieces just need a little bit more time. So this is a great dish because it's so versatile. You can basically serve it on its own as kind of a side veggie, or you can serve it alongside your meal like barbecued steak or things like that. This by far is the easiest and fastest way to prepare scapes. It's honestly our fallback method. During escape season, we get so many scapes that we get honestly kind of tired of going through all the steps of preparing different recipes. So the easiest thing for us to do is just to kind of fry them on the stove quickly. You can throw them on the barbecue if you'd like. That's definitely a possibility. It just kind of depends on what kind of flavor and what kind of direction you'd like to go in them. So when you're cooking the scapes, you don't want to cook them until they're soft. You still want a little bit of crunch on them. Take a look at this guy right here. Even though you can see that the skin is kind of wrinkled a little bit, it's still going to be nice and crunchy. And you know, they don't have an overpowering garlic flavor. Kind of think asparagus with a hint of garlic to it. Now we're going to make pesto. Garlic pesto is just like basil pesto. However, it's just a little bit spicier. This is the one recipe which is not dairy-free. If you are wanting to make a dairy-free option, remove the Parmesan cheese, add in cashews for the creaminess of it, and add in Nutritional yeast to give it a kind of a cheesy flavor. So I've got my rough chopped garlic scapes. I have, I would say, about half cup of Parmesan cheese, and probably about 1/3 cup of almonds. I have some salt, some pepper, lemon juice, and of course olive oil. My first step is I'm going to want to take my garlic scapes and just kind of throw it into the food processor. I'm just kind of eyeballing the amount. And next I'm going to throw in my Parmesan cheese. And now I'm going to throw in my almonds. Before I add any oil, I'm going to run the food processor for about 5 to 10 seconds just to kind of rough cut everything beforehand, and then I'll start adding my oil in afterwards. I will have to stop the food processor a few times to kind of push down the mixture. But I wanted to just kind of pause it and take a look. So you can still see that there's a chunk of Parmesan cheese over here. And it's still kind of pretty chunky. So it's going to need a bit more processing, a bit more chopping up. And it's going to need more oil. And now I'm going to add just a little bit of lemon juice. That's good. So if you take a look how creamy that's looking, I'll show you in a bowl later on. I can feel quite a bit of Parmesan cheese. I love cheese, so that's kind of why I put a lot of it in there. You can always scale down a little bit. So you would use garlic pesto just like the way you'd use just traditional basil pesto. You'd use it in pasta sauce, you'd use it on sandwiches, you could put it on your steak or your pork chop if you wanted. But let's say you made a big batch of it and you can't use it all at once. What you can do is take an ice cube tray, fill it all up, throw it in the freezer, and once it's frozen solid, pop all the, well, not ice cubes anymore, but ice cubes of pesto, pop them out of your ice cube tray and put them in a Ziploc bag and just pull them out of the bag as needed. Maybe you want to make a nice little sauce with it. Maybe you want to throw it into a soup or a stew for an extra pop of flavor. The possibilities are really endless. When I was making it, you could kind of see I wasn't really measuring the oil or the salt or pepper, but it turned out perfectly. It's not oily, and you can see how creamy it is. The last recipe for garlic scapes is by far the most complicated and time-consuming to make. However, it's also one of my favorite ways to use them. And while it doesn't have a name, since I kind of just threw everything together one day and kind of went from there, I like to call it dressed pasta. I've cut my garlic scapes a lot smaller this time, as you can see. And beside them, I've got some rehydrated tomato slices. So the reason I've rehydrated them is because they were originally dried just like this, like tomato chips. But I need them kind of a little bit more moist for this recipe. And we also have tomato seasoning over here. We have black pepper, we have cashews, we have salt, we have bacon, we have Bob's Red Mill Nutritional Yeast. There will be a link for this in the description below. And we have some pre-cooked pasta there. Honestly, this recipe is way better with pancetta or with salted pig fat. However, I didn't have either one of those, so in a pinch I'm just using bacon. And I've pre-cooked it. The first step in this recipe is to saute the garlic scapes. But I'm doing it a little bit differently this time. I've added whole bay leaves and whole peppercorns here too also. So once these are sauteed enough, let's take a look. Perfect. You want them tender, but not soft, right? So the next step will be to add our pasta. Keep in mind, there's absolutely no measurements for this. I just kind of eyeball it out each time to make sure there's a good ratio of each ingredient in here. That's good. So now I'm going to add my rehydrated tomatoes. The key to this dish is to make sure all the flavors are fully intermingled and everything's integrated with each other. My next is going to be my bacon. And now I want to add my salt and pepper. So since everything's pre-cooked, the key is not to have it on the heat for too long. So now it's going to be my cashews. And now is going to be the nutritional yeast. Nutritional yeast is deactivated yeast, but it's fortified with vitamins and minerals. It gives the pasta a very cheesy flavor. So that's looking pretty good. Now my last step here is going to be to add the tomato seasoning. However, before I do that, I want to turn off the stove, remove it from the heat, spoon it in. So the reason I want to remove it from the heat with the tomato seasoning is because the tomato seasoning will burn and it will stick to the pan. So that gets added at the very end, just basically to coat everything, to help with the tomatoey flavor. And I think just a touch more tomato seasoning. So I want the seasoning itself to coat all the pasta. I want the cashews coated. I want the scapes coated. I basically want it to taste like it has tomato sauce without the actual tomato sauce. And now that's looking pretty good. Despite this dish not actually being in any actual pasta sauce, it isn't dry, surprisingly. And that's due to the rehydrated tomatoes that I put in. And it has a very strong tomato flavor because of the rehydrated tomatoes and because the tomato seasoning has coated pretty much every ingredient in here. Despite the endless possibilities of how to cook scapes, maybe you just don't have the time to deal with them when they're still in season. So one, you can freeze them. I've taken some scapes earlier and I've frozen them. I've just stuck them in this bag here. I've just roughly cut them and I stuck them all in this bag and I froze them just like that. And you can see none of them are really stuck together. And I can tell you from experience, even if they do stick together, you just basically take the bag and you squeeze it and they come apart like that. It's super easy and you can use these in everything that I listed before, like soups, curries, stews, chilies, things like that. The only thing you can't really do with the frozen scapes is saute them because of the water content in them from being frozen. Another way you can also preserve them is by making garlic powder. It's taken about 24 hours for me to dehydrate the garlic scapes enough in my Excalibur dehydrator to powderize them. There will be a link in the description below for the Excalibur dehydrator. So I've dehydrated them for about 24 hours. I've stuck them in my Vitamix in my flour container, and I've just basically ground them into a fine powder. The nice thing about the garlic powder is you can use it in your spice cabinet. Maybe you have a recipe calling for a dry rub, or maybe you're making some salad or things like that you can't really use fresh, wet produce for. This is a great substitute. Another thing you can do with the garlic scapes is to pickle them. And you just take the jar of pickled scapes and you throw it in your cupboard and you can use it just whenever you want. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video and it was helpful in giving you some recipe ideas for how to cook garlic scapes, give us a thumbs up and leave a comment down in the section down below. We really appreciate it. If you would like to see more of our content, don't forget to subscribe to us.